Welcome to Vintage Hollywood Archive. Betty Grable, an American actress, dancer, singer, and famous pinup girl whose bathing suit poster was an icon of the World War II era. Betty Grable's sly smile turned towards the camera is one of the most iconic images in history. As the pinup queen of the world, Grable lived a scandalous life that's the stuff of Hollywood movies. While her girl next door image has endured through the 21st century, the reality of her dark, dramatic life was anything but ideal. Why was Betty Grable's great success short-lived? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you're new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Vintage Hollywood Archive channel. Betty Grable, the Pinup Queen. The tragedy of Betty Grable. Betty Grable smiling over her shoulder in that one-piece bathing suit and with that pile of curls on her head made World War II a little easier for a whole lot of GIs. Her iconic bathing suit photo made her the #1 pinup girl of the World War II era. It was later included in the Life magazine project 100 Photos That Changed the World. But life wasn't always fun for Betty. Why was her famous pinup taken with her looking over her shoulder? She was pregnant at the time, not married, and scared to death. The photographer then told her not to worry and posed her with her back to the camera. A bitchy, scandal-mongering life of the movie star that is as garish as Technicolor. Grable's story has the full litany of typical Hollywood sleaze: child abuse, perversion, licentiousness, alcoholism, abortions, gambling addiction, greed. It's a grotesque caricature of a movie star's life. A lot of ink has been spilled covering the lives of history's most influential figures, but how much of the forest is lost for the trees? No history of American pop culture in the 1940s would be complete without mention of Betty Grable, the most popular pinup girl. Grable possessed the outstanding fortune of not only having an ideal body, but arriving at the most fortuitous time imaginable. The famous pinup photo of her, taken by Frank Powolny, made her the highest-earning actress in Hollywood from 1943 to 1951. Indeed, it was not hyperbole that earned Grable the nickname of the girl with the $1,000,000 legs. Not only were her legs famously adored by American soldiers fighting overseas, they were actually insured to the tune of $1 million. Grable was the banner actress for the era before the advent of Playboy and other publications designed to satisfy the lust of the heterosexual male, an era that objectified women but in a more wholesome, less sexual way that was designed to reinforce all American values. However, if Grable was, monetarily speaking, the most successful actress of the 1940s, there was a major gulf between her commercial success and the critical appraisal of her acting talents. Grable never won an Academy Award, and the swift demise of her career testifies to her inability to sustain her career after she had begun to age and her glamour showed signs of atrophying. In a famous quote, Grable once noted she was the kind of girl truck drivers like, a statement that simultaneously encapsulates her wide appeal but also the lack of sophistication that precluded her recognition among the premier acting talents of 1940s Hollywood. Decades later, her films are largely forgotten, which isn't surprising since they were a collection of movies that were designed to gain quick commercial success rather than long-term critical acclaim. Certainly, Grable should be acknowledged for her acting career, but her fame rests more on the impact she had on wartime American culture than the intrinsic value of any of her films. We look at Betty Grable's place in war-era America as well as her acting career, exploring how she came to gain such unprecedented popularity. But why her career did not last as long as many of her contemporaries in Hollywood, women like Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, and Bette Davis. By analyzing her triumphs and adversities, it's possible to understand the whirlwind life and career of Betty Grable. What was Betty Grable's appeal? what made her the first woman to become the country's #1 box office draw and the highest paid and most powerful star in Hollywood during World War II. She was right for a war-torn America. She was both the all-American girl and a spunky, spirited, liberated woman as well. She appealed to both men and women, and also not just to Americans. Many Japanese and German soldiers were found with pictures of Betty Grable in their breast pockets. But she made life difficult for the wardrobe, makeup, and publicity people, anyone who had anything to do with her image. She insisted that her legs show even when she was in a period movie, and she would rip up any costume she didn't like. She loved to gamble, and every year everything had to stop for 5 or 6 weeks so she and her husband could attend the horse races at Del Mar, California. Betty Grable was a highly competitive woman who refused to take second billing in an era when most women did. She always said she wanted a strong, powerful man, but when she got one, she did everything she could to emasculate him. She had a string of affairs with some of Hollywood's most famous men: Tyrone Power, Artie Shaw, George Raft. Born to Billy Grable, Betty was doomed. She was an adorable, rosy-cheeked blonde little girl. But that didn't mean her life was perfect or even well-adjusted. Her cold, horribly manipulative stage mother forced the unwilling child to debase and humiliate herself to fulfill her own star fantasies. She forced her daughter into dance lessons and countless child beauty contests in search of fame. Granted, beautiful Benny won most of the pageants. When her mother couldn't find any new dance class or pageant to enroll Betty in, she turned to her own friends to get her fame fix. On slow days, Lillian would present Betty at casual gatherings and demand that the girl perform for the adults on command. Billy abandoned her husband and other daughter, dragging Betty from St. Louis to Hollywood. Grable might have been a successful child performer around her local area, but eventually, all this stress caused multiple issues for the little girl. From a disturbingly young age, she suffered from intense fits of sleepwalking as well as a fear of crowds known as demophobia. The 13-year-old became the meal ticket, though she had periods of little success. She was apparently never schooled beyond the 7th grade. She struggled to make it in movies for years. Her mother lied about Betty's age, and she snagged a part in the 1929 film Happy Days. During the 30s, sometimes under the name of Frances Dean, she played roles of varying importance, but never starring ones, in several comedies, such as Hold'em Jail and The Nitwits, and musicals which included Palmy Days, The Kid from Spain. Finally, because she could dance a little, sing a little, act a little, and had the legs, good looks, and that elusive star quality, Grable became the top box office draw for Zanuck's Fox musicals during the 1940s. One of Grable's first adult relationships really couldn't have gone worse. Various affairs and marriages with Dan Daly, Tyrone Power, Jackie Coogan, and Harry James brought her little happiness. When she was young, she got together with a handsome married man named George Raft, a tough guy actor associated with sinister figures like Bugsy Siegel. Well, Raft quickly proved just how tough he was. He beat Grable, who fled from the relationship. Most actors struggle to make it in Hollywood for years, but most actors aren't Betty Grable. In 1929, she premiered in her first film. By 1930, she had worked as a chorus girl before signing with legendary Hollywood producer Samuel Goldwyn. This made her one of the original Goldwyn girls, along with the inimitable Lucille Ball and Paulette Goddard. In 1934, Betty signed a 5-year contract with RKO Pictures. She worked for most of the major studios in the 1930s. The young actress married Jackie Coogan, another child actor, in 1937. However, they divorced in 1940, the year after she signed with 20th Century Fox. Betty became the studio's top star throughout the decade, with such splashy Technicolor films as Down Argentine Way and Pinup Girl. When the United States entered World War II, Hollywood began producing content for the Americans serving abroad. One way to cheer up the servicemen was through pinup photographs of famous actresses, which they made into posters and shipped overseas. Rita Hayworth popularized the pinup, but it was Betty Grable who became its most famous model. Her famous pinup was taken when she was 5 weeks pregnant, inspired war-weary GIs with a reminder of home. Despite competition from Dorothy Lamour, Rita Hayworth, and Lana Turner, Grable was indisputably the #1 pinup girl for the GI. For that platinum blonde, blue-eyed Hollywood starlet had a set of gams that inspired American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to set forth to save civilization from the Axis powers. Betty represented the flesh and blood girl back home, patiently keeping the fires burning. Betty Grable earned the nickname $1 Million Legs, and she didn't get it for nothing. In the late 1940s, 20th Century Fox insured Grable's legs with Lloyd's of London for $1 million. Hosiery specialists and retailers often cited her gams as having the perfect proportions for stockings, and Grable was under no illusions about what brought in the big bucks. As the star once quipped, "I became a star for 2 reasons, and I'm standing on them." She was reported to be the highest paid woman in the United States, earning $300,000 a year. Between the years 1942 to 1951, she was the #1 female box office earner in Hollywood. The film, Pigskin Parade, was supposed to be Betty Grable's big break, but what it really did was earn the starlet her first rival. See, it was also the first feature film of a young girl named Judy Garland. Garland won over America with her role, so instead of making Betty Grable a bona fide star, the film introduced Judy Garland to the world. After Pigskin Parade, Betty Grable suddenly found herself typecast as a naive college student, starring in a series of humdrum roles and even duller films. Grable didn't have the best judgment when it came to her love life. In 1943, she married jazz trumpeter and big band leader Harry James. They had 2 children, but divorced in 1965. She had a relatively short life. She succumbed to lung cancer at the age of 56, but during her short life, she had a prolific film star career. By the time she was 23 years old, she had already played in about 20 films, including the Academy Award-nominated film The Gay Divorcee in 1934. During the 1940s decade, she was the top star of 20th Century Fox. During a 13-year period covering the 1950s, she played in about 25 musicals and comedies. Her last big hit with Lauren Bacall and Marilyn Monroe was How to Marry a Millionaire in 1953. Divorced from James, she took up an entourage of homosexual men as companions and gophers. Always selfish and cruel, Betty became more tyrannical and mean-spirited as she grew older. It is hard to see it as a tragedy exactly, because there are no dramatic turning points, no idols toppled, no hopes failed. It is an unremittingly grim tale, light black from pole to pole. Grable was wealthy and extravagantly successful, as well as an alcoholic, a gambling addict, and a chain smoker who finally got lung cancer. It may be sad, but it's not a tragedy. The few efforts to legitimize Grable's attitudes with psychological apologetics are meaningless set next to the litany of her failings. She remained popular until the mid-1950s when musicals declined. The veteran actress appeared in her last film, ironically titled How to Be Very, Very Popular, in 1955. Several of those were set at the turn of the century, and by the late 50s, Grable's kind of movie musical was itself a period piece. When her film career dried up, she did shows, mostly in Las Vegas. She continued her career with television and nightclub appearances in the 1950s and the stage in the early 1960s. Latter days Grable led a star-struck life, but it was not rife with scandal like numerous other careers. She cared about her family. Her family life meant more to her than her stardom, but she was a star nonetheless. Betty Grable died of lung cancer on July 2, 1973, at the age of 56, and was buried in the Inglewood Park Cemetery in Inglewood, California. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new here.